every decision you make and every thought you have is a calculation based on your past experience in your life and what you've seen other people do. So when you want to be like someone, that's because your brain has seen that person and thought, that's the life. That's it. That's just because you have this memory of what you saw and thought when you saw that person. It's not actually what's happening right now. You don't actually know what that person's doing right now. And so I think just learning to deconstruct our thought patterns and even just starting by being aware of them is a huge, huge win.
That was Natalie Saar, and you've landed on the Me and My Health Up podcast. I'm your host, Anthony Hartcher, your well-seers. The purpose of this podcast is to enhance and enlighten your well-being. And today, Natalie's going to be doing that just for you. She is a 8 times book author. 8 books. So she's published a lot of fiction books, but now moved into nonfiction. And we're talking about her latest nonfiction book, which is called 1% Better. So yes, this episode is all about 1% better. It's all about you going on your personal journey to gaining that 1%. And we talk about finding your purpose, starting on that purpose, and how to stay on that purpose, and how do you know when you're on purpose and how do you know when you're off purpose. So we talk about all this thing around finding your identity, finding your purpose, and improving yourself every day to improve your self-worth, self-esteem. So without much further ado, I'd love to welcome you into this conversation I'm having with Natalie Saar. Welcome on the Me and My Health Up podcast. How are you, Natalie?
Good, Anthony. How are you?
I'm fantastic. I'm really looking forward to our conversation. Before we get into the conversation around finding your purpose and becoming that 1% better, I would love you to share with the listeners how you've arrived at being the 8 times publisher of books.
Yeah, I would love to share that. I am a storyteller by nature. I've always loved telling stories ever since I could, force my family to sit down and watch me put on little puppet shows before I could write. So I've actually written mostly fiction, but I've always been interested in self-development and self-improvement. And I always read, ever since I was like 12, I think, when I read How to Win Friends and Influence People, I always have a nonfiction book going in my rotation. And I just kind of became like the friend that people went to for advice. And I was like, you know what? I love looking into this stuff. So I might as well just write about it. And so I had always wanted to start a Substack. And so I turned it into a Substack called 1% Better. And I, after publishing a few books, was like, why don't I just turn this into a book? I have enough content. So I actually wrote a lot of content for the book that's not on the Substack. So it's only in the book, but it was so fun. I had such a good time. And that's how I arrived at it.
Wow, storyteller, and started with puppets. Really intrigued. So, let's talk about this self improvement or personal development journey. So, in terms of throughout your research, what have you come across in terms of what we're actually looking for when we do go about this journey?
Yeah. So I think, for me, really kind of what started this, like sparked this idea for the Substack was I was kind of having like a crisis with my own purpose. I was like, how can I, like, I was at work and someone was like, draw the Venn diagram of what you're good at and what you can make a living doing and what's in the middle. And it was writing. And I was like, that can't be my purpose though. Like my purpose can't just be writing. It can't just be storytelling. And then I just sat with that for a while and I finally realized actually my purpose can be writing and it can be storytelling. Like even if you think, back in the day, like traveling bards is kind of how we pass down history to each other and oral storytellers and things like that. So actually storytelling and writing very much can be a purpose. But then I noticed like I felt really secure in that, but a lot of my friends who are writers didn't feel secure in it. And other people I just was chatting with, they didn't feel secure in what their purpose was. Obviously, like as a writer, I collect a lot of artist type friends. So we just kind of we're all like, what is our, like, we're in our 30s. What is our purpose? And so that's kind of what started me down the journey of trying to figure it out. And really, it's so simple. Your purpose is just like it really is the thing that you love to do. Like you wouldn't be drawn to the thing that you love to do if that wasn't meant for you in some sort of meaningful, important way. And I always tell people too, like have to be anything big. Like, I think, purpose is a huge word, and sometimes it's like, "Oh god, like, it has to be this huge thing, like, this world-changing thing, and if you don't change the world, you haven't lived your purpose." And for a lot of people, you could be the really good, like, planner in the friend group. You could be the person who's really good at knowing your kid. I like to give this example a lot because I think especially, like, people who are moms, sometimes they find, like, well, like, I feel like my whole purpose is to be a mom now, and at some point, you kind of have a little bit of a crisis, and you're like, "Well, my kid's gone now, that can't just be my only purpose." And it's like, you know what, though? Like, how many kids could grow up and say their parent knows them, like, actually supports them and knows them? Even if, like, one person can say that, that's, like, pretty huge, and if that's your purpose, that's awesome. And so I just always encourage people to think about it and kinda lean into that. Just get curious about it, you know? You don't figure anything out if you're not curious.
100%. And I guess, the things that you're interested in or that are really important to you are going to change as
Yes.
we move through life because our environment's changing around us and
Yes.
circumstances are changing. So we, and new things spark our interest based on a curious journey that we've taken on. I'm sure like storytelling's taking you on, like, I remember, well, at the start, you shared that you started, it was all about fiction, right? And characters and making up stories. But you've now gone into more nonfiction, and that's just because you started on something that you love doing. It led you down a path, and then it opened up more opportunities, and then you've
Yep.
explored them. Yeah,
That's exactly correct, yeah. I love writing cozy mysteries, so I'll still put out cozy mysteries and stuff because you have to do the things that make you happy, and obviously writing nonfiction does too, but it's more of like an intellectual exercise versus an artistic one. Like, I'm working on another one right now. I think everybody feels a little down about the economic environment that we're all in at the moment, and especially with AI, people are worrying about their jobs and all kinds of things like that. And so I'm working on a second nonfiction called Fake It Till You Make It: The Science of Feeling Rich, because I think a lot of us don't realize just by like the fact that you and I can be on a computer right now talking to each other, we're like in the top 5% of the world, you know? And, like, I may live in a studio apartment, it may not be the biggest place in the world, but I'm definite like, if you look at the positive things in your life and, like, what's really going for you, that really helps you a lot. So it's kind of been like a double-edged joy, like, not a double-edged sword, but I can't think of a better word off the top of my head. I always joke that's why I'm a writer, not a talker for a living. It's like a double-edged joy where I get to research the stuff I'm really curious about and really interested in, and then I benefit from learning it. Yeah, storytelling set me down a path I didn't intend on doing. There's a lot of imposter syndrome, right? Where it's like, well, I'm not exactly a doctor or psychologist, which I say in the books, but I love school. Like, I have my MBA. I'm a very good researcher. I'm a journalist by trade. Like, I do have those skills to offer other people, and it just feels a little selfish to keep them to myself.
100%. And you can present that subject matter from another perspective. Like, so when you're actually a subject matter expert, you can get too much amongst the weeds and you don't know how to talk about the subject because you talk about it in that language, right? Whereas you're coming from a bystander thinking, well, how do I relate this to everyday people? And so therefore, your point of view or perspective of it can be much more engaging and relatable because you're coming from a different angle. So I think it's great in terms of you letting go of imposter syndrome and stepping into these fields of interest because, again, you can add that unique perspective. Just going back to your double edged sword, well, this podcast is very much a double edged sword moment for me, right? So I part of what's kept me podcasting, like I've done over 300 episodes, is the education of self, right? So there's a self interest here, right? So yes, I started it on behalf of like helping people, and that's still the motive of the podcast. But part of what I've realized over time through doing it is that it's opening up my lens of health, and so I'm going on this journey with the audience,
Yeah.
with the listener, and I'm just curious. And so Hence, when your PR company reached out to me, it was, well, this is cute. Like, you're coming from a writer's perspective. I actually want to hear it from a writer's perspective because storytelling is how we better relate to the world, right? And
Yes.
so subject matter experts can, as I said, just get too much into the weeds and are unrelatable. So I'm really keen to really explore this from your writing perspective. And yes, don't let go of the imposter syndrome. You're well researched and probably read just as many books as a psychologist or someone else in the field, right? So yeah, so really keen to, we're talking about purpose and just bettering self and doing it, 1% better. And you're saying start with what you love and just start there, right? And go. And so so you mentioned the Venn diagram in terms of what got you started. Have you sort of come up with a framework to help others get started on what their purpose is and sort of let go of that imposter syndrome or thinking it's not enough because they're comparing themselves to some other expert?
That's so interesting. That's such a good question. I do have intentions of making workbooks to go along with this over time. I'm very pleased to share that it's a SIBA Awards finalist. So we'll see what happens in April with it. But I'm just glad that it's getting out there to more people because, to your point, I haven't found a framework yet that because we're all different and our journeys are different. And like, it doesn't matter what age you are, it doesn't matter any of those things. Like, so basically, how the book is written is, and like, sorry, I'm mentioning the book a lot. It's just, it's where all of the research and information is. But the way that I wrote it is it's just in alphabetical order by topic. So, like, acceptance, balance, purpose, laughter, curiosity, whatever it is. Because while you can just read straight through it, I think on any given day, we're struggling with any given thing, right? And so, I thought it would be helpful to do it just in alphabetical order so people could be like, you know what? I'm struggling a little bit. I'm going to sit down and look at this. And I think, if we just have if we just think like if you're thinking about how your day is going and if your day is going like a little off the rails, what is it about the day that's going off the rails? Or if your day is going really good. I think sometimes we over index on what's going bad and we don't stop and pause in like the goodness of a day either, and that's really important to do too so that you can try and replicate some of those factors in another day. And so I try to put it like that in the book because I think, sometimes what someone's going through is not what someone else is. And so, like I was saying, like, I feel like I found my purpose now. And I feel like for some of my friends, obviously I'm not them, they're themselves, but I think some of their purposes may be writing. I can't make them see that until they want to. And so that's why I tried to put a lot of things in there to encourage you. The reason I chose 1% is I think, like I said, I've always been really interested in self-development and I I have come with every single framework you can imagine, like an embarrassing amount of frameworks to try and make my life better. I joke and I wrote about how I once had like this matrix of like personal, work, projects, friends, health, like a whole thing. And I was determined to find a balance of every single one of them in a week. That was my biggest learning from it was that every single week is different and there is no balance that's the same, not even from person to person, but from day to day for most people. And that's what kind of made me start thinking like, can I be 1% better? Like, I'm not going to find this balance. I'm giving up on this universal equanimous balance. Like, how do I just be 1% better? And for a year or two, I would like keep a journal where like that, it was just a one line every day. Like, what did I do today that was 1% better? And I would write down, and sometimes it's doing less, right? Like sometimes it's taking a nap when you're really tired versus like pushing through because obviously your body's tired and that's what it needs or whatever it is. Or sometimes it's doing the hard thing you didn't want to do. Like it is going for a run, even if it's a short run. I like long distance running. And sometimes I'm like, it's only a 1 mile run that's worthless. And it's like, no, you still went and did it. That's great. And it signals to your brain that you can do that. And that's kind of where the growth in our brain is when we do things that are out of routine and out of character because it shows your brain, hey, I'm doing something new and it's safe to do this new thing. And so I think in those little moments, that's where you build up kind of this tolerance and your brain is like, okay, that was scary, but we did it, even though, didn't wanna do it, but it was okay, I feel good now, maybe we try it again, And then you end up finding some sort of your purpose, and to your point earlier, it can change, like, it does change, we change as people, and that's really important to be flexible with it too and not be too anchored to what you think it is.
Yeah, 100%. Like, relationships change, our situation around, we might be having a family or our jobs change or the
Yeah,
economic environment changes, the technology changes. And, you've mentioned all of these things. So, absolutely. And new things will spark our interest too, based on our
yeah,
curiosity. What really has caught my attention is you mentioned acceptance as the first thing, in the book, A acceptance. I think what happens is that people think there's something wrong with them and they think that the people around them are so much better. And so therefore they're so looking at life through their lens or and not really engaging with who they are. And so I think one of the biggest things to finding your purpose is accepting who you are, because in order to find what you love, it's an inward thing. It's not you don't look outwards for it. And I think a lot of people, when they're thinking, when they get asked the question, what's your purpose, they're looking outwards. They're looking at to the people that they admire and thinking, I would love to be that person. So therefore, that I want that purpose. But it's inward looking. And so, how what in terms of your writings, your research, this whole subject of self acceptance, what are some of the steps that the listener can take forward in terms of accepting who they are? And then once you accept who you are, then you can obviously work on who you are and do the one percenters.
yeah, those are all great points. I mean, acceptance is so important in so many ways. I think at least for me, foundationally, and everybody's different, but the thing that helped me the most was years ago, I was dealing with, like, really, really bad anxiety, and, it was work related, and, we all need a job, and the job markets aren't always good. I graduated during one of the, like, most famously terrible job markets ever, which is probably relatable to some people graduating right now. So, I had really bad anxiety. I didn't have any tools to deal with it, and I came across this book called Zen Mind, Beginner Mind. And so, I think a lot of when it comes to acceptance is, like, taking everything, and I don't have a Buddhist background or anything like that. Like, it was just a great book to read and learn from, and it's just looking at the world, like, as an observer, right? So, I am on this call with you, this podcast with you. I don't know what you're gonna say next, and that's great. Like, that's the adventure of life. Imma be honest with you, I don't know what I'm gonna say next. That's part of the adventure of life too. So, I think if you start there, it helps you deconstruct all of these building blocks you've built against yourself. I wanna be like that person. Okay, well, do you know what their life is like? Like, do you know what that takes? I think a lot of people wanna be influencers and they wanna have all this stuff. Do you know they have to record everything that they do? Like, do you know that they're actually working 24/7 even though it doesn't seem like it? Do you want to put your whole life on the internet? So I think if we can just stop, and this is hard, it is so hard to stop and just be with yourself in this moment and just know you don't know what's going to happen next. And if you think about what happened in the past, that's just going to like sort of make you feel bad too, because that's the other thing about the brain, right? Is that the brain is both, like, wonderful and so frustrating at the same time, the conscious brain, because it wants to keep us safe. It wants to keep us alive. Its number one job is to keep us safe and alive. And so every decision you make and every thought you have is a calculation based on your past experience in your life and, like, what you've seen other people do. So when you wanna be like someone, that's because your brain has seen that person and thought, that's the life. That's it. That's the one I wanna have. But that's just because you have this memory of what you saw and thought when you saw that it's not actually what's happening right now. You don't actually know what that person's doing right now at all. And so I think just learning to deconstruct our thought patterns and even just starting by being aware of them is a huge, huge win. If you aren't used to thinking about what you're thinking and being aware of what you're thinking, that's a huge win. That's the beginner's mind. Like if you're a beginner at something, if somebody said, we're going to go play sports ball. You've never heard of sports ball before. What is it? You have no idea what to expect. You're entering into that with a beginner's mind. So I think if we can sort of approach life that way, it makes it easy to be 1% better because you're not being so hard on yourself. It's February 25th. We've never lived February, or maybe it's February 26th for you. We've
Mhm.
never lived to this day before. Like, this day will never happen again. It's new for all of us. We're all a beginner at this day.
It's so very true. Like that sense of presence, like when we're totally present, there's no worries, there's no anxiety, right? It's only when, as you said, we're fast forwarding into the future and making it up. We're actually making it up. We're
Yes.
delusional, and then or we're going back to the past, and that's already happened, right? So it's we're no longer in that past. Yeah, we may be carrying some memories or some emotions from that past, but it's not with us at the moment. And so,
Yes.
but you're totally right that like the brain is certainly wired for, first of all, survival, because if we're not surviving, we can't thrive. And I think what your work does is really take someone from that survival thinking into thrival, because it's the growth, right? It's that incremental growth, which you need to step into the unknown in order to grow. And so I think certainly what you shared there was just realizing everyone's in the same bucket. We all don't, we can't, none of us can predict the future. Even the futurists get it wrong. And so it's pretty much just living each moment and going with a curious mind, an open mind with that. And that, I guess a curious and open mind has less fear associated with it. You know, when we, I guess, induced by fear, we're very closed minded and shut down. So with that Zen mind in mind and, being more present, stepping into the unknown. And once you step in, you become more confident. What are some of the steps beyond that in terms of, that's a good foundation to work off? How do you know when you're on the right path? Like, what sort of indications does someone look for to say, yes, this is right? Like, so for example, back to your journey, storytelling. How did you know that, yes, I'm on purpose? This feels like, so how can people just sort of check in and loop back and get the feedback to say, think or know that they're on purpose?
Love that. You are very good at interviewing. You're asking very good questions that I haven't thought of before. I think the clearest indicator has to be resistance, right? So um, if you are doing something and you are feeling resistant towards it, and that's not fear, that's not anxiety, it's like actual resistance, then that's not for you. You know what I mean? I this became really clear to me. I was at a different job that like later in my career and I loved it and I thought I was going to have that job for the whole rest of my life. And then I was talking with a career counselor and she was like, "Do you think maybe this job is hard because it's not for you?" And I was like, I hadn't that hadn't crossed my mind that maybe I'd outgrown this job and maybe that's why I was feeling resistance towards this thing that I once loved and like found refuge in and thought was the greatest thing. I had outgrown it, and I never in a million years would have thought that would have happened, and that kind of made me start thinking about where else am I feeling resistance in my life? And so I think, we can approach things as like, with our little childlike mind, like we've never been in this world before. We're just going to go through this with the beginner's mind. But then the next thing is when you feel resistance, that's kind of when you know it's not for you. And I think the way I like to explain it is, like weight training or anything, like even if you do Pilates, yoga, those are still forms of sort of resistance training, right? Like you are building your muscles through this resistance, but sometimes it's too much and you know when it's too much. So there's a healthy amount of resistance. You know in your gut when it's too much and when you're not growing from it anymore and when it's becoming a detriment to you. You're overtraining or whatever it is. So I think that's another great indicator on the path to whether or not, because then, and I'm sure you've been in this situation too, when you stop resisting it, right? Like even just choosing to write a book, or maybe when you decided to start this podcast, like it's like, oh, I got to do this. I got to do this to do it. I got to do this, but you don't do it. And then when you do it and you're like, I feel so much better now that I've done that thing, you know? And it was like, it could have been that easy all along. You had to do hard work and it requires maintenance and you still have to keep doing hard work, just like we are all going to have to work out for the rest of our lives or our bodies fall apart. But I think that you have to be able to find that level of healthy resistance, and when it's too much, that's when you know it's not for you anymore.
Yeah, it's a really good point that you bring up this whole thing around resistance, because what I'm seeing a lot in clinic is certainly this feeling overwhelmed or burnt out. I, often question as to, are they trying to do something that is not connected with who they are, or they don't value, but they just feel that it's a, they have to do it, or they should or ought to, and it's sort of not really coming from within. It's sort of that voice saying, "Oh, you must do." Here in Australia, like the big craze at the moment, is high rocks training, right? So everyone's doing high rocks and you got to, go out and be a high rocks trainer. And so again, some people, keep pushing themselves to do high rocks training, but they just, it just doesn't resonate with them. And, there's that resistance there just constantly. And I'm just, in terms of your point, it's like, if we see something as resistance, then we got to question whether it's important to us, or because if I come up against a podcasting challenge, I don't see it as a resistance. I just see it as a challenge that I just want to overcome. It's a problem
Yes.
that I want. It's like I'm embracing the problem as opposed to seeing it as resistance or something that's stopping me. And I
Yeah.
think that's exactly what you've experienced. Like, you have, like, they'll probably call it, this term writer's block. You'll be writing a book and you encounter writer's block, but you probably don't interpret it or see it as writer's block. You probably call it something else, right? It's maybe just not the time to write or something. I don't know.
That's exactly correct.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, you're totally right there. It is, I mean, and in that respect, you have to know yourself, right? And I think that's hard. That's a hard part too, is that we're so disconnected from who we are as people and ourselves. And like, am I thinking this thought, or am I thinking this thought because someone put it in my head,
Yes.
right? And then there's the whole thing. I'm not the thinker of my thoughts. I'm the observer of my thoughts, which that's, we could go down that rabbit hole another time. But like, that is a whole part of it too, is this and is an original thought, you know? I feel like a lot of the time right now, especially with like we have such a wealth of information at our fingertips, a lot of the time we're busy regurgitating what we've heard someone else say instead of coming up with our own original thoughts. And sometimes I'll find myself like, if I'm in a discussion about politics and someone says something, I'm like, "Do you think that, or is that an, or did you hear someone say that, or is that an original thought?" And they're like, "Well, I heard someone say that." I'm like, "What do you think about it?" And we don't even stop to think for 1 second, what do I think about that? We just constantly have to have opinions all the time, and that's not actually how we're supposed to do anything.
Yeah, like, just thinking out loud here in terms of, like, the way in which our education system is, how we're sort of taught and not really taught how to think ourselves. It's very much learn this information and it's either right or wrong. And so we're sort of, this absorbing information. We don't question it. And I think it's only later on in life that you start to question what you've learnt, or and you start to learn that that material is no longer true. And, so it's, yeah. So I think if we've sort of not had that open mind, then we really get stuck.
Yeah.
And yeah, we struggle to find our own thinking, and generally just still be that young student that just takes everything in like a sponge and believes it, as opposed
Yeah.
to, observing the information and thinking, and questioning it and challenging it.
Totally. There's this theory right now that we're actually in an information dark age where there's so much information that we actually have no idea what's true and what's real. And
Well,
that's why it's so important to have original thought. But then, you compare yourself to what other people think and what are the people in your friends circle thinking and what will people think of me if I think this way and all of those things. And it's every day is hard and being like a better version of yourself is hard. And that's why I think it's so important to remind yourself like it just has to be 1%. And sometimes it could be so simple as like I was more aware of my thoughts today. Like, even if you just meditated for 2 minutes and you've never done it before, that's awesome. You were better today.
yeah, 100%. And I think part of that, s- I guess, the insecurity that gets brought up is when you're wanting to challenge the norm, but then you feel that you're going to lose friendships or, will they like me? And so therefore, I think, oh, I don't want to lean into that insecurity at the moment. It's like, I really value this relationship you get what I mean? And so we can conform and just go along just to feel connected. But, and that's dependent on how self-confident we are or, what our self-esteem's like. And so,
Yeah,
it really takes a lot of really built up self-esteem, which I'm sure the 1% improvement is doing that, through reading your book, is helping build someone's self-worth, self-esteem, so that they can speak their mind, they can speak their or share what they really think, as opposed to just conform or just go along and sort of that yes pleasing, which really drives people nuts.
absolutely. And it's so interesting because we just don't even realize, like I said, I benefited so much just from writing the book because I didn't know a lot of this stuff. And even just before we chatted today, I was like, oh, let me just sit down and flip through a chapter. And one of the ones that came up was rejection. And it was
Yeah.
so interesting because I just had a friend text me that she had just gotten a rejection letter for a piece she wrote. And she's like, but at least they told me something. And at least I got this information, which as a writer, you never get the rejection letter. You just get ignored forever. I was like, I'm excited for you. Like, I think that that's good feedback when you get rejected. But when I was reading the chapter, to your point, rejection feels so hard to us. It actually, there's in our brain, it releases the same chemicals like as it does when you're in physical pain. So it really does have an effect on you, even though, so it's like, it's easy for people around you to be like, well, why aren't you over this yet? Like, it's not that big of a deal. It's like, well, you're not deal. It's like if you stub your toe, worst pain ever and no one around you can sympathize with you. That's
Well,
that's how rejection is.
Well, and it makes total sense because, like, we're social beings. We require like a community of us in order to survive, right? We're not these, we don't do well as solos trying to navigate life. We need that connection, and pretty much the animal kingdoms, alike, right? And
I
so,
think a lot about that too because I'm a night owl. Like I've worked in finance for most of my life, so I've always had to be up really early and that is like absolutely against my biological clock, but I do it. And I was like, "Why is this?" And it's because when we were cavemen like before clocks or whatever, someone had to stay up at night to make sure that no one got eaten in the middle of the night by a wild animal. And so some of us really are biologically wired to be up at night, and some of us really are biologically wired to be up in the morning. And it doesn't make you a failure for not being a morning person. There's plenty of worms to get at night, also. The early bird doesn't have to be the only one who gets. But I felt really bad about that for a long time because I was like, "Oh, I'm not as awake as my colleagues," or whatever it is. But it's
yeah,
because of that comparison and we wanna fit in and stuff, and we just have to be gentle with ourselves and with other people to know we're all different, and that's what makes us alive, and I love your phrase "thrival." I'm gonna start using that. That's part of it.
absolutely. Just and to your point, I think it might have been in Professor Matthew Walker's book around sleep.
Yes.
He writes a fantastic book on sleep, and through his studies, I'm pretty sure he shares that this is what he thinks we have. The teenagers are very much night owls or become night owls. So they, like when they go into adolescence, and that's, as a teenager, that's when we're the most strongest we'll ever be in our life. And so he shares that he thinks that they have this night owl wiring to protect the tribe, right? Or to protect the group because they are the most strongest of the group,
That's
right? So
fascinating.
yeah. So then I'm thinking about perimenopause and how that's a transition out of womanhood, right? And I'm thinking, well, the role changes as you move out of womanhood, right? So the mother needs to be sleeping in order to feed the child and breastfeed and things like that. I'm thinking, well, if when you become a grandmother or you step out of womanhood, is that a similar mechanism? Because, in perimenopause, you go through the cycling of your hormones like you entered as a teenager, right?
Yeah.
It was trying to find itself. It was trying to mature into this mature
Yeah.
cycle. And then you exiting that mature cycle and going through this fluctuation. And I'm thinking maybe there's something around why women struggle to sleep at night during perimenopause because they're going into a new phase of life. I don't know. Like
That's so
it's,
interesting. You're also making me think of like it's a very common in like ancient storytelling tradition, the maiden mother crone archetype. And I think when you think of a crone, right, it's just an older woman, but I typically think of her like at her fireplace at night.
yeah, well,
Like I don't
and
think of her out in the fields.
Well, but that's it. It's sort of like they're transitioning into a new role in
Yeah.
society, and all these symptoms are actually helping them. Like so these symptoms of perimenopause. People hate it. Like they generally take that negative perspective of it. But I'm thinking it's serving a purpose, and I'm trying to think. How does this purpose fit in society? And anyway, you brought up that sort of night owl thing, and I'm thinking there's something to this, right? There's
You're gonna be
something more
thinking
to it.
about this now.
So anyway, ignited a thought process in me, and I'm going to explore it a bit more. I I liked how you touched on it in terms of like, and this often happens to us is that if we're going through something that is we're perceiving other people not going through it because at that when you're in the financial industry you would have been just assuming that, well, you're just looking at other people, they just look more energetic, so therefore they're morning people, but actually they may have been experiencing the same thing as you were.
Yeah.
Like it's a bit like
Yes.
that awareness piece you mentioned at the start. Like we can be awareness we're conscious of the tip of the iceberg, which is the public victory or the praise or the recognition they're getting, but we're unaware of the bottom of the iceberg, which is all the private victories that they've done behind the scenes, like you mentioned at the very start. And I think, we're very good in society to put on a show. It's very much the highlight reels of our social media, right?
Yes. That's totally right. I couldn't agree more. I mean, again, I could go on and on about this. I wrote 100 things about it. But that's really where a lot of it stems from, right? Is our need to belong because we need our brains just want to keep us safe and alive. And I think that incrementally we have to keep teaching our brains we can do these different things and it's okay. I think I forget what I heard, but one of the most powerful things about being a human is our free will, right? We don't have any, like, we're not robots. We don't have to do things that people tell us to do. But even like in the animal kingdom, they have these very regimented cycles and migrations and things that need to happen and that they do and whatever. And free will is kind of like what separates us from that. And we have the free will at any time to do whatever we want, including be 1% better.
Well, that's really interesting because when we don't execute that free will, we are very much like those migrating herds. We're just following the pack, right?
Yeah.
Or we're just going along with political opinion and just saying, yes, sir, or no, sir, or, yes, madam, whatever, like it's just conforming. And
Yeah.
that's, as you've just mentioned, that's, that we have this ability to execute free will. So why not initiate it? Why not use it?
Yeah. Like, is this my thought? Is this a thought that I personally hold true? Or is this a
Yeah.
thought someone else said? And I really like that person and I really respect them or whatever it is, but it's still not mine. And it doesn't have to be yours. And you could be like, actually, no, I'm just going to let it go.
Have you, in your research, come up with like a way in which to manage that? Like, okay, I'm stepping out of my comfort zone. It feels a bit awkward, but at the same time, I'm challenging myself. I'm growing and doing the 1% thing. but I get a sense that I might step out of my friendship group, or this might, I'm worried about what other people think, because I'm doing this or acting in this way or behaving in this way. Like, have you come up with anything that can help calm that sort
Yeah,
of?
I
Yeah, yeah.
think, it is all very hard. I was raised in a very, very traditional Christian household, very small town, and I just personally, through my own work, don't hold those beliefs true anymore. I'm very respectful of whatever everyone believes. It just doesn't resonate with me anymore and who I found myself to be as a person. And so that was really hard to start kind of like being honest about that. And then, to it's even hard to be like imposter syndrome, right? Like I'm on a podcast telling you stuff about people's brains. Like that's crazy. And so to go home and see people that I've known forever, which of course all the people that I am close to and that I choose to be close to, because you get to choose who you want to be close to, right? You don't have to be close to anybody. The people that I choose are all wildly supportive. And I'm so grateful for that. But it's still scary to be like, oh yeah, I'm going on a podcast to talk about psychology and how our brains work and how to be better people. And it's like, you're imperfect. Why are you going to, you know what I mean? Like, who died and made you king? Which, of course, no one said. I've just said that to myself. So,
But I think that's the beauty of you've been very open and sharing how you're feeling about doing this podcast and speaking about the subject, which is really connecting for others hearing this, right? Because they feel this way about doing something they haven't done before, or they've done not so much and it doesn't feel comfortable yet. It's like when I started podcasting, I was a nervous wreck, but
I'm
now
sure.
now it's like second, it's like jumping in a car for me. It's like just do it in autopilot sort of thing. Initially,
And
it
you're
was
great at it.
yeah. Well, I mean, but if you look at behind the scenes, like this is 305 episodes. Well, I actually with my two podcasts, I've done nearly 400 episodes.
Wow.
So, and then back in the day, it took me 8 hours per episode. So there's a lot of time invested, and I think that's as you've probably realized and come across in your research and your writing is around all those things that happen behind the scenes in order to create the book, right? How much, like maybe share that, maybe share like maybe it's your first book or whatever. I mean, you've done eight of them, so
Yeah.
yeah.
I'm super passionate about helping people. I strongly believe that everybody has a story to tell, and I think that the loss of us reading fiction in like as a culture and like as I don't know as a world is part of what has made us less empathetic as people, right? And there's studies to back this up. So it's great to read nonfiction too, but you don't ever get to know. I'm never going to be exposed to some of the characters in real life. I'm never going to have the opportunity to do that. And so the only way I get to understand different people's ways of life is by reading fiction. And so I'm very passionate about helping people learn, like publish their story. Like it doesn't have to be for money. If you're doing it for money, you're doing it for the wrong reasons. Trust me, I've written 8 books and I make like $5 a month. So if you're doing it for money, you're doing it for the wrong reasons. So like I made a website called theindieauthors.com so that because I have an SEO background and content marketing is my wheelhouse, and so I know that you need to have a presence online, and so you can go on there and like fill out a form, and like it's just little old me with the Squarespace just like putting up an article for you, but it's my way to give back to the independent author community. I just really, yeah. So, like, this is a roundabout way of answering your question. I went through so much to try and figure out a process to publish books. And it wasn't until last year that I even like came up with a very good one. And even publishing this book was very difficult because in the physical one, I have like lined reflection pages after every chapter. So you could like write down what you're thinking or whatever. You don't have to, but I'm doing the formatting on Word by myself. Like I'm not a typesetter. I'm not a graphic designer. It's all very difficult and I don't want I don't like gatekeeping. I don't want anyone to have a hard time ever if I can do anything to help make their you have to let people learn, right? Like I'm not going to do anything for people, but I'm more than happy to lead people to the water because I think the more stories that we have out there, even if two people read your story and it really resonates with them, that's incredible that you have done something in their life that otherwise wouldn't have been done. And I think that's really special.
And I think, like I'm just listening to what you're sharing, and my initial thoughts was that people can step into characters and they realize that they're reading a book. So it doesn't, they still feel safe, but they get to explore life from a different perspective or a different way of seeing life in a safe way, like because they're just reading a book, it's on a page. They're not actually, like having a dream or nightmares about, being this.
People love mobster books. They love to
Yeah.
watch The Godfather or whatever. No one wants to be a mobster. No one wants that danger around with them all the time. And there's actually a lot of studies too that show like, when you finish reading a really good fiction book, it feels really sad, and that's why people read it over and over again because your brain doesn't understand that's not a real person. You've spent it's kind of like if you meet someone at a conference for a weekend, right, and they're your friend for life now, but in books, you've spent 3 days reading that book, and your brain doesn't understand that's not a real person, so the only way you can, like, quote, unquote, "see that person again" is to read the book again.
Because they've really connected with that character, that
Yeah.
fictional character, and
Or you'll be like,
it's
"Oh, I hated that character so
okay.
much. They're the like, no one likes Draco Malfoy." You know what I
Right.
mean?
Okay. Yeah,
From
okay,
Harry
okay.
Potter.
Right, wow, wow. So yeah, because I mean, it's funny, like, your path has been very fictional based, and I'm sort of, this non-fictional person and never really had a strong connection with fiction, but now you're educating me to understand how people get really into fiction and how it helps them because it's a form of really, I guess, exploring the world in a safe way, like, or just exploring life in a safe way, like just getting out of their personal issues and they go on a little adventure in a safe space, essentially, like, or
That I've never thought of it through that lens. That's exactly correct. That's exactly what it is.
yeah, like, because I'm exploring, through my other podcast, is this whole thing around happiness and ultimately what are we, and it brings up this whole thing of what's the purpose of life. And I've come across this wanting, we seek to be ultimately connected, right? And the ultimate connection is connected 100% with self, 100% with everyone, and 100% with everything, right? So it's this feeling at oneness with the universe, right? And that's the journey that we're going on. And what you're sharing in terms of fiction writing is that we can relate to more people through in a safe way. You get what I mean? We see the world from a different lens from their perspective. And that is helping us better relate to, I guess, the world as a whole or the
Yeah,
universe as a whole.
there's studies too that show that this is also like obviously this is not responsible for it, but in part why women are more empathetic than men because women are more likely to read fiction books than men are, and it's because we're exploring all these different characters from like a quote unquote safe space. I really like how you're phrasing that. And men don't offer themselves the benefit of that as often as women do for some reason. So, yeah, it's exactly what you're saying. It's so powerful what books can do.
Well, I'm just, thinking out loud in terms of what you just shared. I can understand it from a women's perspective because the hormones, you've got more of the hormones that seek and crave connection, right? And hence, in order to connect, we got to relate to other people and other characters. You get what I mean? Like, and so the fiction is actually helping them to connect with more people and feel more connected.
And
But if
going
I'm
back to the brain, right? Like safety. The more
yes,
situations you can be aware of, the more your brain can keep you safe.
well, it's true, and you've got a broader network to support you,
Yeah.
because you're able to relate to more people and connect with more people. And I'm thinking from a male perspective, they connect in different ways. They connect through like the whole. They're thinking, well, what resource am I going to gather from doing this? And so I think from a fictional book, they think, well, what do I gain from it? I'm just going into this world of exploring characters that they actually want to achieve or accomplish something from reading it. Like, so if
Yeah.
they read some bestseller author that's mastered this, then they're thinking, well, I've gained that skill. You get what I mean? Like, they're just seeing
Yeah.
things from a different perspective.
I mean, hey, I'm right there with him. I love nonfiction. That's why
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
started writing it too. It's so interesting.
Well, I think it engages that testosterone, right?
Yeah,
And we all, I've got estrogen and, oxytocin and things like that women have, but it's just the ratios that we've got is what we pursue more of. That's what
genetic level, we all have like a masculine and a feminine side to us too.
that's
And
right.
so that feeds into those as well.
Oh, well, exactly. And it's sort of what's leading the chicken and the egg scenario is the hormones leading this,
Yeah,
what we term to what we lean into, or is it, societal has influences on that as well. You get what I mean? Like, because
absolutely.
we're not willing to lean into that because I'll lose this friendship, or I'll insult this you get what I mean? Like, so men leaning
Yeah,
into femininity is, well, you're no longer a tough guy. I don't want, I don't want to know, so I've chosen a feminine path in terms of my career, which is health, right? Which is
right.
more, from a
Which is
societal
crazy
perspective.
that that's
Yeah.
considered a feminine path. You
Well,
know what I mean?
yeah, totally, totally.
That's
But
wild.
it is, but and I'm surrounded by female health practitioners, right? But I'm comfortable in this space. But again, I've lent into that.
There's
It's,
no resistance
it,
there. It's the one
it's
for
not.
you.
It is. It is. So I really appreciate this conversation. It's been very enlightening. You've certainly enlightened me on fiction and why people might read fiction or what they get from fiction. And I'm certainly, it's got my head spinning, my wheels turning. So I'm sure the listeners are starting to better understand why people do what they do and what they engage in through what you've shared with us in this episode. So they're really interested in finding out or delving deeper into the research that you've done around 1% Better. How can they find this book? How can they connect with you?
Yeah, so you could just visit nataliesaar.com, and on there there's links to my books, there's links to the Substack which inspired the book, and so I continue to write more things on there every week. And then yeah, you can just find all my books there if you're interested in the fiction ones too. But yeah, that's it. I've had such a great time chatting with you. You've given me a lot to think about also, and I've had the best time. Thank you.
I think it's why I continue to do the podcast because, like, it gives me the opportunity to connect with people that I wouldn't normally bump into,
Right. I don't know
and
where we'd bump into
well,
each other.
that's it exactly, and it opens up just worlds of thinking that I wouldn't have thought of and seen different perspectives. So, like, you're really helping me see another perspective to fiction writing, and
Good.
sort of then think about what's the purpose of it. Why do we write fiction? Why? Why? What's the psychology behind that? So anyway, you've really opened that up, which I really appreciate. Just before we go, I'm really keen. What's the latest one percenter that you've come across that it's lit you up?
So that would be last week's actually is risk. I was thinking about risk and why we are so willing, like if you're at the casino, right? I forget what movie I was watching, but they were gambling and I'm like, why are people willing to risk so much just to make so little compared to how much they're risking, right? Like at some point in movies they're risking their house and their car and whatever it is to get what? Like $5,000, which is not nothing, but it's certainly not a house and a car. So like why are we willing to risk so much? And there's a couple different theories behind it, but basically it's that we are willing to risk so much because it's so silly and simple when you think about it, but it's not real until you call it quits. And so once you have to realize your losses and like deal with then you feel the pain of the loss, and the pain of the loss is so much worse than the benefit of a win. And so on the flip side, what we also do is we take our wins too soon. So if you were, let's say this is a crazy way to do this at a casino, don't do it. But let's say you go into a casino and you're like, I want to make $5,000 tonight. And you go in and you make 4,000 and you're like, that's not five, that gotta go in for that one more. most people won't do that unless they're crazy, right? Most people will just walk away with the 4,000 and be happy, but you could have gotten that one more 5, right? So it's so interesting how all of us have a different risk tolerance. All of us see risk differently, but for the most part, time and time and time again, since 1985, they've been studying risk and we all react the same way, which is to loss, not necessarily gains, but we all react the same way to loss, which is we are willing to continue taking losses because we're so unwilling to realize that we've lost.
And it's probably why people hold on to loss-making investments, because it's only when they actually sell they realize the loss, right? So,
Yes,
yeah.
exactly. That's what got me thinking about it. I was like,
Yeah.
"Whoa, so how does this fit into investments and things like that?" And that's exactly what it is. People will hold a stock and
Mm,
write it down till it's worth
mm,
nothing just because
mm.
they can't handle realizing that they picked a loser.
Well, that's it, and it's the pride getting in the way, isn't it? It's that
Yep.
real, it's referred to as the ego, or yeah. So it's really interesting. It probably leads into a whole another podcast of
Yeah.
discussion. So I really appreciate you coming on and being respectful of your time here. But certainly would have you on as a future guest, if you're willing
I'd
to come
love
and
to.
chat again, and just explore and be curious like we have on this episode. So really appreciate your time, Natalie.
Thanks, Anthony. Thanks. I appreciate you too.
You're welcome. And to the listeners, thank you for tuning in to another insightful episode of Me and My Health Up. Please share it with others that you believe could benefit from Natalie's insights and wisdom. Please share it far and wide. We want to get out this helping people to accept who they are and grow and thrive. So please share it with as many people as you wish and desire, and appreciate you following the podcast. Thank you. Podcast disclaimer. This podcast and any information, advice, opinions, or statements within it do not constitute medical, healthcare, or professional advice and are provided for general information purposes only. All care is taken in the preparation of the information in this podcast. Connected Wellness Proprietary Limited, operating under the brand me&my Health Up, does not make any representations or give any warranties about its accuracy, reliability, completeness, or suitability for any particular purpose. This podcast and any information, advice, opinions, or statements within it are not to be used as a substitute for professional, medical, psychological, psychiatric, or any other mental health care or healthcare in general. me&my Health Up recommends you seek the advice of a doctor or qualified health provider with any questions you may have regarding a medical condition. Inform your doctor of any changes that you make to your lifestyle and discuss these with your doctor. Do not disregard medical advice or delay visiting a medical professional because of something you hear in this podcast. This podcast has been carefully prepared on the basis of current information. Changes in circumstances after publication may affect the accuracy of this information. To the maximum extent permitted by the law, me&my Health Up disclaims any such representations or warranties to the completeness, accuracy, merchantability, or fitness for purpose of this podcast, and will not be liable for any expenses, losses, damages incurred, indirect or consequential damages or costs that may be incurred as a result of the information being inaccurate or incomplete in any way and for any reason. No part of this podcast can be reproduced, redistributed, published, copied, or duplicated in a form without prior permission of me&my Health Up.